It is November, and you may think that that means there isn't a whole lot to do out in the garden. But fortunately, or unfortunately, depending on your weather, that is not the case. You may have projects to finish up like I do, things to put away, plants to cut back. You may have absolutely no idea what to do this time of year to put your garden to bed, so to speak, for the winter. But here's what I'll be up to over the next couple of weeks. Here are some of the messes that I don't normally show on camera, but behind this little patio, which the furniture has all been put away for the season, this perennial bed, which is my shade garden, has not been touched all year. So the first thing I did was rake all the leaves off. I spent some time digging up weeds. I cut back some of the larger perennials, and then I laid some mulch. Now, if you have healthy soil and very low weed pressure, leaving the leaves may be all of the mulch that you need. But this garden needs a lot of work. There is a lot of weed pressure. So it was really important that I weeded and then properly mulched this area. And that's going to make spring next year an awful lot easier. And some of that is just aesthetics, but I do have a lot of early blooming spring perennials in this shade garden. Because with this big oak tree right here, there's no leaves in early spring, and it gets a lot more light than it does later on in the summer. So I take advantage of that early spring light by planting daffodils, a few tulips, some muscari, and I can't even remember what else is there. There's quite a bit. So it's always a really nice treasure hunt to come out here in the spring and see what's popping up. I've been pulling the stakes out of the vegetable garden. The vegetable garden itself has been pretty clear. There's pretty much nothing to see here. Everything's been cut back, but while I was cutting it back, I actually found a whole bunch of cilantro that I forgot I seeded. So even though we've been having multiple frosts, there is lovely cilantro out here, which is frost tolerant. And that's part of the reason it doesn't grow well in the depths of the summer, actually. It does enjoy cooler temperatures. We also still have quite a few green onions growing, so we've been enjoying those in the kitchen for sure. Now, bulb planting is still happening. I actually have some fall blooming saffron crocus planted in here, which is lovely. I've gotten a nice little harvest from that, and this foliage will stay green all the way until the spring. But this crate was full of daffodils, and I've been making my way through clearing these beds, planting bulbs, which might be one of the most rewarding fall tasks. Planting bulbs can give you a really nice show in the spring. Tulips can be particularly susceptible to deer, but things like daffodils and other bulbs are a little bit less so. But if you plan on planting bulbs, now is definitely the time to do it. Not just flowers actually, but that goes for garlic too. This is the perfect time to plant your garlic for harvest next summer. It is a good time to cut back your perennials. These are lilies that I had used for cut flowers, and I'm going to leave about 2 inches of the stalk, and that is just so that I don't forget where they're planted if I decide to plug in some annuals in here next year. And all of this top growth is going to go right into my compost pile, which is a pretty low maintenance compost pile if I'm honest, but I still want to make use of all of this foliage, even if it takes a couple of years to get there. While I'm doing this, I also go through and pull out weeds. There aren't a whole lot because I've been on top of weeding most of the time this year, but there's always a few that sneak through. Now, I always dread this job, mostly because I put a lot of effort into growing these pumpkins myself in the summertime, but when we're getting frosts, and especially after the Halloween season, is a good time to ditch those pumpkins before they start to rot and then create a mess on your deck. We leave ours out for wildlife, but we don't put any chemicals or preservatives or anything on them, no paint, etc., so they can be returned to nature. And sometimes we get volunteer plants too, but I do expect that the deer will get most of these. Next tip, finish planting things. And that's a big one. I have so many things still in pots, and I've planted actually quite a few of them, but there are still things that I'm not going to get to in the next few days. What I am going to do is give them all a good water. And while it's cold outside and pretty damp in the morning, it's still important to remember that those pots are drying out and they still need water. Not as much as they do in the heat of the summer, but it's really important to make sure they're not drying out. So in the greenhouse, I have some pumpkins that I'm hoping are starting to ripen. I actually have some Meconopsis seedlings that I'm going to bring in the house, and these don't need water. There's a few right there. They germinated so late, but I don't want to lose them, so I'm going to attempt to overwinter them indoors in a cool spot. What I do have though is some succulent cuttings. I have some rosemary cuttings. I have a bay tree and a lime. There are some feverfew seedlings, the last of my seedlings that need to get in the ground. But for now, everything's going to get a very good watering, and it's going to have to be happy with that for now. There, now I haven't completely decided what I'm going to do with these cuttings yet. I may toss them in the ground somewhere, but I think what I should do is check the root systems, because I highly doubt they're very well developed, and if they have a pretty weak root system, I think I'd like to try to overwinter these indoors also. The rosemary don't survive our winter, and I have overwintered some here in the greenhouse before, but they were mature plants with good root systems. These are brand new cuttings. Those need to go indoors. These are all going to go indoors before the overnight temperatures get too cool. And the bay tree and the lime are going to go indoors too, but at the moment they are happier out here for as long as possible. The feverfew is going to get planted ASAP, but let's dig in to this turmeric. So there is my turmeric harvest for 2024. It's pretty pathetic, but at the very least it's half a dozen cups of tea, and all of these tops are just going to go into the compost. Keep in mind they stayed in this seed tray for maybe 10 months. I started them pretty early. They didn't get potted up. They should have been potted up a couple of times and then planted into the ground or a big planter full of rich soil. That didn't happen. They stayed in this seed tray. So I'm lucky I got this much, but we can't win all the garden experiments, especially when we completely ignore them. I bit off more than I can chew this year. I tried way too many things. I do that every year. It's all part of the fun. I'll probably start too many things next year too, but that's part of the reason I love gardening so much. So that is the last of the greenhouse jobs, which is too bad because it's really nice and warm in there. There's some pots of tender annuals that are definitely far gone that need to be tossed. This is stevia. That needs to be cut back, but the parsley is still perfectly fine. So this pot could stand to be cut back a little bit and then brought into, actually, probably into the greenhouse. Well, that has a nice healthy root system. There we go. There, now both of those can go in the greenhouse. Rosemary and sage are a perennial. The parsley is a biennial, but we still should be able to get fresh herbs from these two pots until well after Christmas, as long as we don't get too cold weather. And probably the biggest job that I still need to do this season is dig up and store my dahlia tubers. I have 3 raised beds here that have dahlias in them. And this is part of my cutting garden. So I have nice tall varieties that I use for cutting. This one I believe was Michaela Miranda, and it's a good thing I made note of where these varieties were because you can't tell at all at this point. The flowers are completely dead, dried up, and the entire plant has been browned by frost. So what I'm going to do today is cut these down to a couple inches above the ground, get rid of the top growth, and then when I have time in the next couple days, I'll come back and dig them up and store them indoors for the winter. Don't forget to subscribe. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you back in the garden soon.